All right, my friends, Eric Lee here with Equity Real Estate and Elite Agent Training. And we just got back from the UAR convention last week. I'm going to be making a series of videos with reports on that because I know that only a fraction of the state's agents are able to make it to these meetings. And the training that is given there really is phenomenal. My favorites are the legal panels. And I want to talk to you about something that I've already made a video about, which is seller finance. But we had one of the state's best attorneys give a class on seller financing there. And I learned some new things that I wanted to share and pass along with you. Now, it was kind of funny because he's like, who knew this stuff? I just found out today. And he's like, no, just kidding. I knew. I found out 3 days ago when I was preparing for this class. So these are some things that are happening right now. They're things that he was researching and I wanted to pass it along to you guys. So what I've got showing on the screen here is the seller financing addendum, something that we use to do seller financing. And this is something that's coming up very, very frequently in my office with agents asking questions about this. And it happens because interest rates have nearly tripled over the last year, caught a lot of people flat-footed. And we're trying to come up with creative ways to help people get into homes. And let's say that I have a loan at 2.5% on my mortgage, and I want to sell my house, but I'm not getting any buyers coming along. I've got people that are interested, but they can't afford it at 7.5% interest rates. And I'm thinking, you know what? I could do it for 4%. I'll do seller financing for 4%. I'll be making 1.5% on this money. We can do seller financing and it'll be wonderful, right? That's an innocent way of making it happen. A lot of time there's investors that maybe aren't so innocent. Some of them are in it for, they're proposing seller financing for good reasons. But I've also been to a lot of classes where it is being taught to investors that basically you set up seller financing and then you don't have any risk. If things go south, you walk away. It's, and the previous owner is left holding the bag. Anyways, there are some not so kind ways that I see being taught or practiced in doing this topic. Okay. Seller financing itself is not bad. I want to be clear about that. It's legal. You can do it. However, there are some things that must be disclosed and people have to be aware of it, both buyer and seller. And so the thing that dawned on me down at conference was this: when we're talking about the due on sell clause, let's read it. It says, if there's an existing mortgage loan, which the buyer and seller agree will not be paid at closing, seller shall provide to buyer a copy of the underlying mortgage, the note secured thereby, the amortization schedule as a seller disclosure under Section 8 of the PSA, and then the buyer's obligation to purchase under the PSA is conditioned upon buyer's approval of the content of those documents. If the holder of the underlying mortgage calls the loan due as a result of this transaction, buyer agrees to discharge any underlying loan that buyer has agreed to take subject to, including any prepayment penalty or fee, and the principal paid to the holder shall be credited against the principal balance due under the note. In such event, the remaining balance due to seller shall be paid as provided in the note. Okay, so let's translate that and talk about what this means. First of all, if there's an existing mortgage loan, which isn't going to be paid at closing, we are selling the house. All right, so we've got a seller, we've got a buyer that's not getting a conventional loan. They're not getting financing from a bank. The seller is acting like the bank here, okay? But they're not paying off their underlying mortgage. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about how seller finance works because, again, I've got another video on that. What I want to do is highlight the dangers that this scenario creates right now. As I mentioned in my other video, the risk that we have when we don't pay off the loan of an underlying mortgage is that there is this due on sell clause in almost every mortgage out there. And this is something that the owners, when they bought the home, they signed the mortgage paperwork at the closing table. And in that paperwork that they signed was this due on sell clause that says, hey, if I sell this home, then obviously I'm going to pay off this mortgage, right? This is the debt that I'm using to secure this property. I'll pay it off when I sell the property. But here we are now, several years later, doing seller financing where we are selling the home, but we're not paying off the debt. Now, this allows the lender, if they choose, to exercise the due on sell clause, which means they're saying, hey, you sold the property. All of this money that you owed us is now due. You've got 30 days to make good on this. So what this paragraph says is that if the lender exercises this due on sell clause, if they call this mortgage, this loan due as a result of this transaction, then the new buyer will be responsible for paying all of this money. Okay, so they've got to make it good. However, that does not absolve the seller of their responsibility because they're the ones that signed these documents at closing. So potentially we could have the bank that originally gave the loan foreclose on the seller who did the seller financing, and then the seller has to in turn go and foreclose on the buyer, because the seller is going to go to the buyer and say, hey, we got this due on sell clause, we've got to make it good. Section 6 of our seller financing addendum says that you will make it good. And the buyer's like, I don't have that kind of cash on me. I mean, I couldn't get a regular loan, which is why we did the seller financing. So I don't know what you expect me to do now. It's only been a month or 2 months since we set this up. My situation isn't any better than it was 2 months ago. So I can't do this. Now, a lot of investors have said, I've been doing this forever. I've been doing this for 20 years. This is never exercised. This due on sell clause is never exercised. However, in my training, I say, if there were a condition in which it would be exercised, here's the scenario. Let's say that the bank had lent money out. This is all hypothetical, of course, right? They lent money out with this loan at 2.5% interest. Now they have the option to foreclose on this home, recapture all of that money, and re-lend it out in a new mortgage loan at 7.5% interest. And not only that, but we see banks going out of business. Okay, banks are actually closing their doors. So if you were a bank and you had the option, let's say that you're seeing other banks around you close their doors, and you have the option to recapture $500,000 that you'd lent out some years ago, and that you're now only making 2.5% on, and you could reloan it out at 7.5%, what would you do, right? This is the perfect scenario, today's market, for this due on sell clause to be exercised. Because in the past, if rates haven't changed, if they don't have this big change, then, the bank's getting paid. And typically there's no real motivation for them to exercise a due on sell clause because their money's out there and it's doing what it's supposed to do, right? But in this scenario where interest rates have made this big jump, all of a sudden there's this impetus for them to do just this. And according to the attorney down there at UAR, it is what they're doing. He has talked to several banks and they've said, this is what we're doing. We're exercising this now. And so he has advised all of the brokerages that he works with and consults with to not do seller financing if there's an existing mortgage loan that will not be paid at closing. Okay. So if you're doing seller financing and the land is paid off, the sellers own it free and clear, then this is not a concern. Okay. All of this due on sell clause, it doesn't exist because the land is owned free and clear, and you've got your typical risk associated with seller financing, which means if the new buyers don't pay, then you foreclose on them, and it's pretty normal risk, right? But what we don't want to do is have this due on sell clause exercised, because then again, this is stuff that I learned from this attorney. The new buyers are all of a sudden like, well, we don't have that, and they're getting foreclosed on, which hurts them. The seller isn't able to pay it off because, they didn't get all of this money from the buyer. And so they're getting foreclosed on, which hurts them. And they come back to the agent and said, why did you advise us to do this? This is hurting us right now. We got a foreclosure on our record. This is costing us all of this money. And the agent, I don't know, I thought it was a good idea. I've never heard of this being exercised. And maybe it hasn't over the last 20 years, but the conditions today say that it very easily could. All right. And so if you're advising your clients to do this type of thing, they could say, hey, I followed your advice, and now I'm in a pickle because of you, and they're suing their agent. So we want to avoid this type of scenario in the current market conditions. All right. Overall, there's nothing evil about it. It's just the risk is very high right now. So we want to avoid this. Thanks, you guys. Hope this has been helpful to you.